Laura Benitez disappeared on the night of June 18, 1961, in Santa Rosa, California. She was 22 years old. At the time, she was a senior at Sonoma State College, majoring in art education. She lived with two roommates in a rented house on Benton Street, a quiet neighborhood just east of the city's downtown. She had spent most of that Sunday working on a painting project for her final portfolio. Her roommates later told police she'd been in a good mood. Tired, maybe, but relaxed. That afternoon, Laura called her mother in San Rafael and said she'd drive down later in the week to help with her younger sister's birthday. It was a normal, friendly call. Nothing sounded off. Around 7:30 that evening, she told her roommates she was going for a short walk to clear her head. She took her small leather purse, her sketchbook, and a few dollars in cash. She wore a pale blue dress and sandals. She didn't take her car keys. That was the last time anyone saw her. When Laura didn't return that night, her roommates assumed she'd gone to stay with her boyfriend, a local musician named Daniel Vega. But when she didn't show up for class the next day, and Daniel said he hadn't seen her all weekend, they started to worry. By late Monday morning, the roommates called police. Santa Rosa police filed the missing person report around noon on June 19th. Officers went through her room. Everything was in order. Her car sat in the driveway, locked. Her suitcase and most of her clothes were still there. The only items missing were the purse she'd carried and her sketchbook. Her wallet, driver's license, and student ID were found later in a drawer under some notebooks. There were no signs of struggle inside or outside the house. The front door had been locked when her roommates woke up that morning. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had seen a young woman walking on Benton or Mendocino Avenue that night. A few residents said they'd noticed someone matching her description near the corner store around 8 p.m., heading toward the park. Another witness, a gas station clerk, reported seeing a woman who might have been Laura about an hour later, standing near a payphone on 4th Street. Police followed up on both leads, but neither produced results. Over the next week, the Santa Rosa Police Department, with assistance from county deputies, organized ground searches through nearby parks and along Santa Rosa Creek. Nothing turned up. By the end of June, investigators began to consider foul play. There were no ransom calls, no letters, no activity on her bank account. She seemed to have vanished without a trace. Detectives questioned Daniel Vega several times. He was cooperative and passed a polygraph test. Laura's friends described him as quiet and easygoing. He told police they'd last spoken on Friday night, 2 days before she disappeared, and that she'd sounded tired but fine. She said she was thinking a lot about graduation, Vega told them. That was it. The case quickly drew attention across Sonoma County. Local newspapers ran her photo for weeks. Dark hair, brown eyes, an open, easy smile. Volunteers helped distribute missing posters across Northern California. But by late summer, the story had faded from headlines. Laura's parents continued to call detectives every few weeks for updates. They hired a private investigator who followed dozens of false leads, sightings in San Francisco, Oakland, even Reno, all of them dead ends. When a woman's body was found near the Russian River that September, the family braced for the worst. The remains turned out to belong to someone else. By early 1962, the investigation stalled completely. In 1963, Laura Benitez was officially declared missing under unexplained circumstances. Her family held a small memorial at their church. The assumption was that she'd been abducted and killed. No trace of her was ever found. For decades, the case sat in the files of the Santa Rosa Police Department. A new detective would open it every few years, review the statements, and close it again. There was never any new evidence. Her parents both died in the 1980s. Her sister, Elena, moved out of state but kept her sister's photo on a shelf in her living room. Every few years, she would search online for her name, finding nothing but old newspaper clippings. By the 1990s, the case was considered cold beyond recovery. Then, in 2018, 57 years after Laura Benitez vanished, her name surfaced again in an unexpected place. In March of that year, an administrator at a long-term psychiatric care facility in Sacramento contacted the California Department of Justice about an elderly female patient who had recently passed away. The woman had been institutionalized since the early 1970s. She was listed in the hospital's records as, quote, Jane Doe number 36. She had been admitted under unclear circumstances, transferred from another hospital that had since closed, and was estimated to be in her late 20s at the time. She spoke fluent English and Spanish but had no identification and could not recall her name or past. For nearly 5 decades, she lived in state care, quietly and cooperatively, but never remembered who she was. In 2018, after her death, new state regulations required DNA sampling from all unidentified decedents. Her profile was added to a national missing persons database. A month later, it matched to a partial family DNA submission from the Benitez family, still on file from a cold case review done in 2009. The woman known as Jane Doe 36 was confirmed to be Laura Benitez, missing from Santa Rosa since 1961. According to the recovered hospital archives, the unidentified woman had first been found in the fall of 1963, more than 2 years after Laura's disappearance. She was discovered wandering along a highway near Bakersfield, disoriented, dehydrated, and unable to provide her name. At the time, local authorities assumed she was a transient or runaway. When she failed to regain her memory after several months in care, she was transferred through a series of state institutions, eventually ending up in Sacramento. Medical notes described her as polite, quiet, and cognitively intact. She could read, draw, and hold simple conversation, but her memory prior to 1963 was entirely blank. She didn't know where she was born, didn't recognize cities or landmarks, and had no recollection of her family. Doctors diagnosed her with dissociative amnesia, likely brought on by trauma. There were no signs of physical injury. Over the years, she developed routines in the hospital, painting, gardening, helping staff with small tasks. One nurse who cared for her in the 1990s said she was gentle and grateful for everything. She had no visitors. After DNA confirmed her identity in 2018, the California Department of Justice contacted the remaining members of her family. Only her younger sister, Elena, was still alive, living in Arizona. She was 75 years old. When investigators told her they had found her sister, Elena reportedly cried for several minutes before asking, "Does she remember us?" The answer was no. Authorities arranged a private meeting at the facility before Laura's passing. Elena visited in the spring of 2018. By then, Laura was 79, frail, and confined to a wheelchair. When her sister entered the room, Laura smiled but didn't show any sign of recognition. She spoke softly, asking polite questions. "Are you a nurse? Do you work here?" Unaware she was speaking to her own sister, Elena showed her old photographs, including one of Laura at 22, standing with their parents in front of the family's house in San Rafael. Laura stared at it for a long time and then said, "She looks nice," as if it were someone else. Despite the lack of recognition, Elena stayed for several hours. Later, she told reporters that the visit felt both heartbreaking and peaceful. At least she wasn't suffering anymore, she said. She was alive all those years. That's something. Investigators tried to reconstruct what might have happened between June 1961, when she disappeared, and the fall of 1963, when she was found near Bakersfield. The distance between the two cities, Santa Rosa and Bakersfield, is more than 300 miles. There were no travel records, no witnesses, and no reports of accidents or hospitalizations matching her during that time. The most plausible theory suggested that Laura may have suffered a head injury or psychological trauma that caused amnesia, leading her to wander far from home without means to identify herself. Because she had no criminal record or fingerprint history, and because national databases didn't exist at the time, there was no way to connect her to the missing person case in the 1960s. By the time fingerprint and dental record systems became standardized in the 1980s, she was already deep within institutional care, listed under a false intake name and long forgotten by external agencies. For nearly half a century, the woman in the Sacramento facility lived quietly, surrounded by nurses who knew her only as Miss Jane. When the truth came out, several retired detectives who had worked on the Benitez case expressed disbelief. One of them, Robert Grayson, told the Press-Democrat, "We always suspected foul play. None of us ever imagined she was alive somewhere, right here in California. It's tragic, really. She was never gone, just lost." After the DNA confirmation, the coroner updated her records to list her true name and date of birth. She was officially recorded as Laura Benitez, born July 3, 1939, Santa Rosa, California. Her cause of death was natural, complications from pneumonia. Elena decided to have her sister's remains cremated and her ashes returned to Santa Rosa. They were placed in the family plot beside their parents. The stone now bears both her birth and death years, 1939 to 2018. Local papers ran the story again, this time under a new headline: Missing since 1961. Santa Rosa woman identified after 57 years. Reporters called it one of the strangest cold case resolutions in state history. Not a crime, not a hoax, but a life that had simply vanished into its own silence. Officials at the Department of State Hospitals later reviewed the archival procedures from the 1960s through the 1980s, acknowledging that hundreds of unidentified patients had once been admitted under incomplete records. Laura's case prompted a renewed effort to cross-reference all unidentified institutional patients with missing persons DNA databases. By 2020, that program had identified 16 others nationwide. No one ever determined what caused Laura's amnesia or how she had ended up hundreds of miles from home. She left behind no written records or statements that could explain her missing years. Her paintings, dozens of them, were kept by hospital staff. Most were landscapes, open fields, distant hills, empty roads fading into the horizon. After her identification, one nurse said quietly, "Maybe she was painting the places she remembered." When asked by reporters if she believed her sister ever truly forgot everything, Elena said, "I don't know. Maybe she remembered pieces but couldn't find the words for them. Maybe she just wanted peace." For the city of Santa Rosa, the file was finally closed after nearly 6 decades. There were no suspects, no crimes to charge, only a name returned to a woman who had lost it long ago. In a small ceremony at the cemetery later that year, a few relatives and former investigators attended. Elena placed a single daisy on the headstone. "She was found," she said softly. "That's all we ever wanted." Laura Benitez spent 57 years missing, and 55 of them alive in plain sight, living quietly inside the walls of a California institution. She never recovered her memory, never spoke of the life she once had, and never knew that people had been searching for her since the summer of 1961. She was 22 when she disappeared, 79 when she was found, and for everyone who had waited half a century for answers, that was somehow enough.